Hello everyone. Since this is either a highlight, a standalone book, or the first episode in a series, I'm jumping in to remind you what the rules are for this podcast. First rule is, no real people stories. That means that any details from our own lives are merely anecdotal, we do not read books about real people, and we are not reading historical fiction. The second rule is that we are basing our analyses off of how the author treats characters and what they put them through. We are not judging the accuracy of the trauma, the accuracy of any actual conditions that may be portrayed, nor the authenticity of a character's reaction to that trauma or that particular condition. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The hosts are not trained professionals, and their opinions come solely from personal experience. In this episode, we discuss fictional depictions of trauma and violence that may not be suitable for all audiences. Please take care of yourselves. Specific content warnings for each episode can be found in the show notes. Events in the media are discussed in approximate order of escalation. This episode contains spoilers.
I'm Nicole.
And I'm Robin, and this episode on Books That Burn, we are discussing War Girls by Tochi Onyebuchi. The description from the publisher. The year is 2172. Climate change and nuclear disasters have rendered much of Earth unlivable. Only the lucky ones have escaped to space colonies in the sky. In a war-torn Nigeria, battles are fought using flying, deadly mechs, and soldiers are outfitted with bionic limbs and artificial organs meant to protect them from the harsh, radiation-heavy climate. Across the nation, as the years-long civil war wages on, survival becomes the only way of life. Two sisters, Onyi and Ifi, dream of more. Their lives have been marked by violence and political unrest. Still, they dream of peace, of hope, of a future together, and they're willing to fight an entire war to get there. So for this episode, we are just going to have two topics because one of them in particular is complicated and far-ranging enough that it kind of would absorb most of the other topics we might try to call out specifically. So, I'm going to go ahead and give it the time it needs.
And also we have two main characters and then another character that is given enough of a presence in the book that we thought devoting a little more time to them, as though we have really three main characters, made a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Because of what we're focusing on, this is going to end up probably more than incidentally spoiling a lot of major plot elements. Like, one of the characters we're going to talk about doesn't even show up until halfway through. So
doesn't exist until halfway through.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah. We'll get to that for sure. So if you're trying to avoid all spoilers of this book, then please skip straight to the wrap up because that's
more than normal.
More than normal. That's going to be pretty unavoidable this time.
Okay.
But our first topic is dehumanization. In both literal and the more general way that it gets used. Like, dehumanization as a topic refers to behaving as though people that are human aren't human or aren't people. And in this particular context, that ends up being more literal than usual because it's a sci-fi book. And so there's room for a lot of interesting plot nuances for that. I hope that sentence wasn't word salad. I'm now suddenly concerned about that. We'll see.
We'll find out. So, okay. So our first character, so we have we have a lot of dehumanization in this book. Specifically, we want to focus on... So, we have a character who... I'm going to explain this because without explanation, it's kind of going to be harder to have a conversation.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, sorry. Voice cracking on me. So, our character's name is Agu, and Agu, and they
based
are...
on the audiobook.
Okay. And they are a compilation, mostly artificial human, pulled from the pieces of other people, dead people. So, their skin, their body is a composite of parts, to the point where one of our two main point of view characters first thought that they just had vitiligo, and no, they're just patchwork. They're a patchwork person of different people's parts of their skin and hair, and I would assume internal organs, and I may be making this up, I may just be remembering it wrong, but I want to say I read a description of one of the characters, and somebody said they had two different eyes, like two different colored eyes.
I don't remember.
That may just have been the visual that I had in my head, but there was one particular one of these where I was like, oh, whoa.
I tend to notice when forms of heterochromia are mentioned in books just because it's a thing that visually interests me.
That may just be something I pictured then. But it's vivid enough that was my mental image. And these characters are also... They are programmed with, presumably, artificial memories and then taught to be these almost robotic, deliberate slaves serving one individual other fighter. And
we're not arbitrarily picking the word slave,
no,
the word
that is used
in
the book to describe these particular characters. Yeah. And they are programmed with what they are told, and I'm phrasing it that way on purpose, are artificial memories, fake personalities that are supposed to help them wage war. But Agu particularly, we really kind of see their journey from, I was created this way, and I do what I'm told, and I like the things that I like because they made it me that way. I was never real. I was only ever a false person. They're treated that way by other people. They think that way about themselves. They tell our POV character, Anye, they tell her that's who they are. But then kind of slowly over the course of their story, we see them be their own person. They like music. They like piano music, specifically.
Yeah.
Anye starts out trying to basically help them get better hand-eye and minute dexterous coordination by playing piano. And they mess around with it for an hour or 10 minutes or whatever. I wasn't exactly sure how long.
Yeah.
And then, on their own, without being told to, unlike every other action until up to this point we've seen these particular creations take, they just go download a bunch of music overnight. Oh, I like this. I want more of it, and I want to know how to do it. And this is right after Anye was told they can't do that. They're not capable of caring about things or taking actions on their own or having their own interests. And, we almost, as an audience, we almost immediately get that assertion of their inhumanity rebuffed by this.
Yeah, so one of the things with dehumanization, particularly with war and kids and
abuse victims.
Yeah, abuse victims,
disabled
a lot of
characters.
For where my point in particular is with war and kids, the adults around them want they're specifically making the effort to not see these kids as human, because if they saw them as human, then it would be harder to use them. And like that's a lot at the root of dehumanization, but in particular, just focusing on it, it would be harder to use them, which isn't always the motivation for the other kinds of dehumanization that you were starting to rattle off. But for this
that's a good point.
Yeah, so it's like, yes, but I don't want quite as broad a brush for that, because in this case, they remember, and they, in this case being the war girls, like people who themselves were child soldiers, and they seem to be like, well, you know, we don't want a new generation of child soldiers necessarily, which is why we have these definitely robot people who are not people. We have these definitely robots. They have skin. Please don't worry about it. This isn't a new generation of child soldiers. This isn't exactly what was done to us. Or at least it's not worse than what was done to us. And so we slightly have a moral high ground.
And we've also programmed them to like war. So it's definitely fine and not a problem at all.
And there's going to be no ramifications for making a bunch of robots who like war, even if that's literally what they'd succeeded in doing, and it's not. Even if that's what they had succeeded in doing, that's, like, not great. That ends up causing problems when, like, later on in the book, some of the synths, like, keep doing war stuff, even when it's not supposed to be a war. Like, to me, especially with you phrasing it that way, like, oh, that seems to be a very particular knock-on effect of the way that the now adult war girls tried to get around.
Same.
Yeah, it just makes the problem happen again.
Right.
And also there's a little bit of a distancing where, like, oh, you know, they've mostly been an all-female group, and so I
they've
think
made
it would
these
be
little
hard.
boys to separate themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Just having just the superficial, the flimsiest excuse of, oh no, it's not the same thing that happened to us. When, like, it's not substantially different, and then they end up having to grapple with that.
Right. Well, at least Anya does. No one else really gets lives long enough.
Yeah.
I do want to note, though, like, they are talked about like they are androids, but they're basically just artificial people.
Yes.
They've deliberately gone, because they have androids. They have, you know, like computer programmed creations also in this book. These are not androids that look like people. They are composite artificial people.
Yeah. And even the androids who look like people
are still treated with more humanity.
Well, what I was going to say is they get out of there and do their own thing.
Oh, that too. Yeah.
They don't want to be around this either. They have enough to not want to be around all of this just war and dehumanization and just really, really awful stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, the as far as like how this, so there are a lot of examples of dehumanization going on in this book. We want to kind of note that we have chosen this one character to kind of emphasize, because they're a very kind of clear, consistent, and the longest explanation of this we get in the book. Everything else is kind of context.
Like there's a lot of levels of this. There's everything from propaganda on both sides of the war saying that the other side are like literally monsters, and when both sides have a lot of child soldiers, when they tell that they're child soldiers that the other sides are literally inhuman monsters, they are children and they believe them. There's a lot of stuff with
or
that. Or
if they don't, they don't have the ability to really do anything about it.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
We also have the augments versus the red bloods. Mm-hmm. If you are artificially augmented or in any way versus not.
Yep.
Which incidentally doesn't seem to mean that the augmentation doesn't seem to include temporary augmentation. We have a couple examples of characters who like insert artificial like brain augmentation, but if you can take it out again, it doesn't count.
Yeah, like it seems like it has some overlaps with like ableism. I just as a very like minor parallel, the way that even though needing glasses is a disability, a lot of people where the only thing that they have going on where they need an augmentation is that they need glasses, often don't categorize.
Yeah, it's very similar to that.
Often don't self-categorize as disabled, even though, like, you can. That'd be true. Without my glasses, I wouldn't be able to function in a lot of ways. Like, to me, it has some of that same feel of like, oh, no, don't worry. I am human. Oh, this thing that I'm not going to keep that I only have temporarily because I want it to, that's not me being a synth or an augment. Your thing that you can't take out without very bad things happening, that's you being a synth.
It would be like arguing that if someone needs a wheelchair, they're not disabled, but if they need an artificial limb, they are. It's really just like lines. A weird... And to be clear, not all augmentation is from something that would become a disability or is a disability, with or without it. But like it's kind of a weird fine line where it's just another way to divide up groups, even when it's internal. Which is kind of there's more layers to it with that one, particularly because a lot of the actual fighters in this society are augmentated in some way, either because they are that way to make them a better fighter or because they have gotten injured.
Yeah, and it's also, to me, it seems like one of the things where if you're motivating a group of people on the basis of an us versus them,
you might as well just add more to it, yeah.
Well, no, what I was going to say is that when you lose the them, you have to make a new them.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You might as well add more layers to make your ideology just more internally repetitive.
Yeah, there are specific motivators and drives that result in just a more and more constrained circle of who is us where everyone else is them. And just fewer and fewer people end up fitting in that center space.
We would be remiss if we don't also just very briefly mention the colorism that also is another us versus them.
For sure.
So the Biafrans and the Nigerians, who are all from Nigeria, they've just separated into the real Nigerians and the Biafrans. Apparently either it's mostly consistent or it is presumptive consistency of skin tone. So the Biafrans are much darker than the quote-unquote true Nigerians in this context.
Yeah. And,
so if Yiffy having lighter skin makes her a target, even though she's part of the community at the beginning of the book.
Yeah, and even saying, well, they're all Nigerians, part of why not everyone feels that way is a bunch of colonialism. Like, there's a lot of things that make this much more complicated, but superficially, absolutely.
Well, but that's the superficial assumption made by characters.
Sure. No, absolutely. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that, like, the colorism, the assumption, like, when they see Ify, they're like, oh, this is a Nigerian child who was kidnapped by the Biafrans. We need to get her back. It doesn't seem to be an option for them to consider that maybe she's actually Biafran. Maybe, it was enough generations back that she's just lighter than those around her, but considers herself Biafran. And in a way, she does, for reasons we'll get to in our later topic.
Yeah, it's complicated for her.
Absolutely, it's super complicated for her, but yeah, like, yes, as another layer of dehumanization, there is an entire facet of it explicitly driven by colorism, for sure.
As we're listing them, I just want to make sure we don't forget that one, because I think those are most of the big ones. We have the colorism, there's ethnic minorities. There's the artificial people versus quote unquote real people. There's the
sense augments,
yeah. Red bloods. They literally call them red bloods.
I was like, that can't be the term. Nope, that's the term.
That is the term.
Yeah.
No, because there's the if you bleed, do you bleed oil or blood? Which that's what they say.
Sure.
Which is wild to me because we have on screen, so to speak, augmented characters who break artificial limbs and then they're not bleeding oil. It's still just blood.
Right.
Like, it's such a like a cognitive leap to justify the weirdness of it, if that makes sense. It's, yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
I actually had to read that paragraph twice because I was like, wait, no, hold on. That's not internally consistent logic. Oh, well, got it. That's the point. It took me a second to...
The point is it's not internally consistent. It is driven by these justifications.
Yeah. But yeah, so back to our actual POV character.
Mm-hmm.
This character, with regards to how they are treated as far as from an audience or a reader perspective, we set up this is something I actually think this book does really incredibly well. We get a lot of these dehumanizations, including this one artificial human character, who are set up so that we see the treatment of them by other characters in universe, and then immediately from our perspective as an audience, it is refuted.
Mm-hmm.
Within a page or two. This particular character, we get told like 3 or 4 times in rapid succession, they have no desires, wants, likes, needs of their own. They will never care. That's not what they're made for. And then this character, a page later, turns around and says, no, I like piano music. And I'm going to hide it from you or not show it to you because I'm not supposed to care.
Yep. And like, before we move on to our later topic, I really, really like this kind of story. So much so that this isn't the first piece of media that I've read or that I've experienced. The other one was an anime, involving child soldier who keeps firing their gun literally in the rain. Like, this is at least the second
what was the anime?
Gunslinger Girl?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, that exact same thing. Like, there's a lot of little details about Agu and the other abts where in Gunslinger Girl, that's the entire plot. And in this, it is part of this much bigger thing. So if you like this being explored here, that might be an anime that you like, depending on what bits of it draw you to this book. But Gunslinger Girl is one that I particularly like because and that's definitely shaped a lot of the way that I approach this book in terms of already having a framework for the adults tried to make kid robots again and then discovered that doesn't solve the problems they thought it would solve.
Oh no.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, so we see this character, they start out kind of hiding this actual thing that they like and that they want to keep doing. But then our POV character here notices, and so as an audience we notice, and this our POV character doesn't ever really treat this person as less than them. Which at one point causes them to just almost break down sobbing because it's just her. She's the only one treating them well in any way, shape, or form, and they do care. They are a person. And they're discovering how to be that. And then even like jumping ahead farther in the story, we then get like pretty solid evidence of not only this character kind of deciding to be themselves, to have a self, to, you know, to figure out what that even means and what it is for them. But also we find out about other of these characters, other of these quote unquote artificial humans who have banded together and are trying to make their own tiny little society in the woods because they can understand each other and they have wants and goals and, you know, everything else that makes humanity. And they can't have it if they go off and be part of the quote unquote real humans. They have to kind of do it alone.
Welcome to our second, and in this case, final topic.
Were you about to say wrap up and ratings?
I was super right definitely not going to accidentally do that. For sure.
I could tell. It was the same inflection and pacing.
Yep.
And I heard it stutter at the end as you're like, no.
Not the wrap up. It's not the wrap up.
Not time yet.
No, this is Circle of Violence Generational Trauma Edition. So it's been a while since we had Circle of Violence as one of our things. Like I know we did it for Long Way Down. I think we did it for one of the books in the Inheritance trilogy. I might be mistaken about that.
No,
I think
that sounds right.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't know if we've done another one, but this is
done at least 3, I think.
I don't know what the third one was. Whoops. But this is Circle of Violence Generational Trauma Edition, focusing on Onyi and Ify. Because, and like we touched on this a little bit in the first topic, like this is a book about child soldiers, and in the case of Onyi and Ify, child soldiers who then grow up and have different relationships with that past, and then with violence continuing into the future. And then there's also a thing where Onyi was a child soldier and then ended up adopting Ify as her sister, who was an even smaller child, but like also a child. And so
but not a soldier yet, deliberately, intentionally.
Yeah. Yes. And so by the time the events of the book begin, Onyi is like an older teenager, but like not an adult yet, but like on the verge of adulthood.
We get a like 14, 15. No, I think she's it's one of the two. Because that was a point at the beginning because she was one of the oldest.
Yeah, like in
the camp where they start, to be clear.
Yeah, to me the important bit with that is that even with these two characters who are technically both children, there is a generational difference.
Yes,
they're
and
not
a responsibility
the same
difference.
And Onyi is kind of a surrogate parent, but explicitly talked about as a sibling, as her sister, and that gets very, very complicated when we find out. I mean, it was complicated. We learned that it has been complicated the whole time when we find out why Onyi was in a position to be taking care of Ify in the first place. I didn't know if you wanted to summarize that or if you wanted to try to avoid spoiling that if you can.
Oh man, that's hard. So I think it depends on how much of this we're going to talk about. Okay, no, we should talk about... I think we can do it without as much spoilers. Okay, so here's the crux of the reason that is I'm actually the one who suggested this topic. Here's why. Onyi is trying so hard at the beginning of this book, putting everything she has into this, having the younger children at the camp, and Ify is not the only one, to grow up without being soldiers, to just have a quote-unquote normal life and have a happy childhood and and get out of this without that experience and without having to even care about it. She's even torn in like the first 2 pages. There's this inner struggle between, oh wow, the younger kids are really bad at standing watch, but that's a good thing because they've never had people next to them die because of it. You know,
right.
She has this internal struggle of like, I need to not, I'm mad that this is happening, but also it's kind of a good thing and I don't really want to, I want them to be better, but I don't want them to need it. And like, just this kind of tense little internal moment where she's like, okay, you know, and so, but also at the same time, we get some pretty heavy-handed hints that she's kind of a little bit abusive to Iffy, physically abusive and yelling, emotionally abusive, and you know, she only hits her sometimes. She hits her sometimes, but you know, that one time she only yelled for an hour and it was better. You know, we get a lot of that happening, and you kind of get the implication later that a lot of that happens because that's how Onyu was treated as a child, as a kid who was being trained to be a soldier. She was thrown around and hit and yelled at, and so there's this conflict here where even though we have this older teenage character trying her hardest to have a campus setup where the younger kids don't have to care about all of that survival stuff, at the same time, she doesn't really know any other way to treat little children, especially one that she's in charge of.
Yeah, because from, I think, her perspective, but I'm not making Ify shoot anyone is actually like a massive de-escalation from how severe and traumatic her childhood was.
Yeah, absolutely.
But her childhood was so bad that even the level that she passes on to Ify, because she literally doesn't know a different way to be around children.
Yeah.
Even the level that she passes on to Ify still is traumatic to Ify because, like, it is child abuse. It is emotional abuse. And we have an awareness that there's probably some physical abuse, but it, like, the book doesn't spend a lot of time dwelling on that. It just presents their current dynamic, which clearly has been shaped by these things in the past. Otherwise, Ify and Oni wouldn't have certain concerns.
Right.
If this hadn't been a thing, which I really appreciated as a way to handle this because it's already a book about war and child soldiers. You don't need a really long scene of and Oni hits her sometimes. Like,
we don't need that.
We don't need
their child soldiers, and also here's a 15-year-old beating up a 9-year-old. Like, we don't actually need that, and the book doesn't give it to us.
Give that. Yeah.
Yeah, but this is one of those things where this is why we like Cycle of Violence as being a Cycle of Violence such and such edition, because cycles of violence or Circle of Violence are
I think it was Cycle of Violence. I will fix it.
Okay,
it should have been remember. Cycle. Yeah. I think it's Cycle of Violence.
Okay. Whatever we did in the past.
Last time.
One of the reasons we really like this is because the feeling and how it happens and the different ways it perpetuates changes depending on what that cycle actually is and the harm being done that is perpetuated. But a lot of ways, and you know, we want to speak more to fiction than real life, but as far as I understand, even in real life, a lot of ways that cycles of violence are perpetuated are because the perpetrators who were hurt themselves and then go on to hurt someone else don't really understand or aren't aware of or don't know how to implement a different way. And this book is a really good example of this because Onyu doesn't want to hurt her. She cares about her. This is her tiny adopted child sibling, the only person in the world that she really, well, one of 3 people in the world that she really cares about. And this is the one that she would sacrifice everything else for. And she still is not treating her very well because she doesn't know how else to do this.
And also, there's because they're refugees in the middle of a war. They're refugees where the 14 or 15-year-old is one of the oldest kids in the camp.
Yeah.
So, like, it means
there's no one older demonstrating anything else.
Sure. And also, I mean, she doesn't want them to have to grow up with violence or in a war zone, but that doesn't change the fact that they are in a war zone. And so she ends up torn between like feeling like she should yell at them for falling asleep on watch because like it didn't matter tonight. Right. It could matter tomorrow. And then, spoiler alert, like it, not like literally falling asleep on watch, but like something happens and like they get separated and like it did matter. She was right to be worried. And I like, there is nothing I could point to as what she should have done instead. Because other than like it would be better if things hadn't been so that the things that she thought were viable solutions worked well. Like I don't know, just her scale for how to be around, for how to like try and parent Ify, like how to be her sister and that whole dynamic. Like she just literally doesn't have access to different ways of doing it. And also those different gentler ways maybe don't make sense in this situation. Like, I'm not saying like I don't know.
I don't know that we can say that. I do want to say that. Granted, this is only my own personal experience, and we don't want to get too far into the real world implications. But there are better, easier ways to get a small child in a severe, ongoing situation to follow you and listen to you. There absolutely are gentler parenting methods that inspire trust, and so they obey you instead of what Ify does, which is hiding and pretending and sneaking instead. But also,
more what I'm thinking is that a lot of those kinder, gentler methods assume you have time.
That is actually what I was just about to say.
Okay, cool.
Anya has the time to do this, but also in her... We could have easily done this exact same dynamic as just PTSD. We talked about it slightly. Yeah. Then we discarded that and picked something else. But we could have done that because what is really happening here is that Anya doesn't feel like there is time because an emergency is always now. Or if it's not, it could be any minute. And so there isn't time to do anything else, and there isn't a better way that she knows how to do. And so she just yells and screams and probably hits and doesn't let herself even, get to the point of what, how else could I treat this child in my care? It just doesn't even get there because she can't, she's stuck. Yeah.
Because, reading the book, we have all the time in the world to think of different things that it would have been better for this character to do. But this character isn't in a position... Even if she knew about these other methods, the rebuttal could be, right, but I don't have time to talk her into whatever because we could get killed. And whether or not she's right, she's not able to consider it for whatever reasons in the story. And I think it's really well put together where the book does not try to excuse that she did this. It presents it as having been traumatic for Ify, as causing problems in their relationship that then cause even bigger problems later in the book. Ify doesn't trust her with certain things and feels like she can't go to her about something that turns out to be super important. It causes problems. The book isn't nah, it's fine that she hit her because she didn't have another choice. The book doesn't really say that she had a different choice, but it says this wasn't fine and caused a lot of problems for everyone, that there wasn't this space and this opportunity to do a different thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then we actually see later... with a character that was in our first topic, that Anya when she's not in the middle of a crisis forever, she has other tools. But the trick is that, you know, this other character doesn't start out as a thing that she's trying to protect and care for. And also, I want to point out that the other character, Agu, is assembled for war. Already comes knowing how to handle themselves around weapons, how to aim and target and fire and watch her back. And there's a level of trust there that is just a very different dynamic where, you know, if you trust that somebody is going to not just do something that will get you and your friends killed, you don't have to cling quite as tightly to trying to keep them under your control.
Right. She didn't have to try and condition...
At least in her head, she doesn't have to try and condition
Agu to handle himself in a fight. Whereas with Ify, she's torn between conditioning her or not, and she ends up on this middle road that's like the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, because there was absolutely a version of reality here where it's, you know, the assembled human doesn't know anything and you have to teach them gun control, and then my headcanon is we would probably have seen a lot of the behavior that she had with Ify with this other child.
I'd say gun control isn't the quite word. You mean literal handling of firearms?
Yes, that is the word.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, literal actual handling of firearms, dangerous situations, battle reflexes in general.
Yep.
You know, if she had to teach this other character these things on screen, I think we would have seen a lot more anger and yelling and panic attacks if it doesn't go well, and, you know, things like that.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
But instead, she can kind of treat this character as more of a contemporary that's just following her lead instead of her trying to hand them the reflexes to keep themselves safe.
Yeah.
And also, I want to point out that, like, a lot of the way that she treats Ify is as though, like, as almost a commanding officer. Like, I tell you that you're not allowed to do this thing because I'm making the decision that keeps us safe. But if you're the commanding officer in charge of, you know, 10, 20, 50 people in a reflex dangerous situation, you don't have time. Even if explaining it to them made sense, you have to know that you're going to say, go here, do this, and they'll do it without needing an explanation. Because if you stop and wait and explain it to them, you might miss the moment or just, you know, die on the spot, depending.
And also,
and she treats Ify like that.
Yeah, and Ify wasn't the only kid in the camp, and so she can't explain to literally every 7-year-old to the degree that they needed explained in order to understand.
I'm not even thinking that would have even been a consideration. I just think that it doesn't occur to her to really explain it beyond do what I say. Because
of that background.
Because of that background and that training where she's used to just you obey that person or you're the person being obeyed and there's no real middle ground. And, you know, we know from later context that Ify would have, if she had everything explained to her, she would have been probably the best, safest person there. Because she is that smart and that aware of her surroundings and has the ability to pick apart and put back together situations that, you know, she would have been an incredible asset. But
there's also a degree to which her 5 years older self is like that and is that incredible asset.
Yeah, absolutely.
But she might not developmentally have been able to be that at the time that she was with only, like, there's probably definitely a bit of that.
Yeah, but saying, hey, the reason I want you to not use this type of thing is because if you can hack our systems, you open us up to being attacked by external people because they can tell you're there. Like, even saying that much to her would have, I think, probably mitigated the, like, inciting incident at the beginning of the book. Because, like, she's completely able to comprehend and extrapolate scenarios from that. But we see time and time again that, you know, just people not telling her, hey, you're discoverable. Once she knows, she can fix it.
Right.
But if she doesn't know, then she just continues trying to sneak around and do stuff.
She can't fix it and doesn't understand why she should stop other than my caregiver doesn't want me to do that. Which, like,
Which just means that I have to be smarter and sneakier than they are, and it doesn't mean, I have to consider why. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of like, don't get caught cheating, and the two ways to do that are to not cheat or to get so good that you don't get caught. And she decided to get so good that hopefully she doesn't get caught, but she's not that good yet, and then things happen.
Can you believe we've been friends for 7 years?
And it all started because I compared you to Alana the lioness.
Tamara Pierce really set the tone of our friendship.
A love of magic.
Briar Moss.
Fantasy.
Briar Moss.
Powerful women. And of course,
Briar Moss. I'm Anna.
And I'm MJ.
And we invite you to join our Circle of Friendship,
where we do a chapter-by-chapter deep dive into the Circle of Magic series by Tamara Pierce.
We answer important questions like, how does Moonstream let certain dedicates take care of children?
Can you imagine anyone else but Mandy Patinkin playing Nico?
Knives, Briar.
And
knives?
Join us every other Monday at cofpodcast.libsyn.com or wherever you download podcasts.
But seriously, knives?
On to the wrap-up and ratings for War Girls. For our gratuity rating, we had just 2 topics this time, because we wanted to have a little bit more of a deep dive on 2 bigger things rather than 3 slightly smaller things. And so for our first topic, dehumanization. So is this moderate, severe, or torture porn? I'm not even going to pretend that maybe it's mild. I don't think. Unless you have like a really good argument.
Are you
about to argue for mild?
No, I'm
okay.
I'm processing. I think it's severe. I think that if we didn't get the immediate reversal on and perspective for the audience, then it would be torture porn, but I think it's just severe.
Yeah. Sure. The generational trauma, I really think it's either moderate or severe.
I think it's severe.
Yeah.
And
Definitely.
I also think that if we only had one character's perspective instead of both, it would also be torture porn because we'd be supposed to agree with them.
Right, but this makes it more complicated. It's easier to know how complicated it is, rather, is what I would say. Then integral, interchangeable, or irrelevant. Could we have taken either of these out and had remotely the same
story.
book?
No.
Yeah, no.
And I'm going to argue we could probably have taken the particular character that we focused on for dehumanization out and just made it like interchangeable. But there's so much of the context of the book is the dehumanization in various groups. That's integral.
Yeah. Like, we picked one to focus on, but you couldn't remove it as a trauma from the book, even if you did excise entirely the very particular character we chose. Yeah, integral for both. Then, was it treated with care?
Whoa, hold on. Nope.
Well, no?
We need to do interchangeable or relevant for the other drama.
Sorry, I said I rattled them both off. I was like...
Oh,
okay.
No, but that's not normally how we do that.
My apologies.
We should specify generational trauma is also integral.
Also integral, yes.
Okay. Now,
apologies for my imprecise speech. Yes. They're
also
both
deviation
integral.
from our norm. Whoa, Robin.
So sorry. I know.
Breaking the mold.
I deviated from a pattern. I will never do that again, ever.
You broke the structure.
Was the trauma treated with care for the dehumanization?
I think enough.
Yeah, we're generally aware of the shape of various dehumanizing sentiments, but there's not, for example, rants about it that I can recall. There's not.
It's contextualized memory recall most of the time, or comments about it, and not. And even when we, again, as we've said before, even when something is happening on screen that is more severe, we immediately get kind of a perspective that we're supposed to get as an audience that is refuting it as a acceptable behavior.
Yeah. The one thing that I will just note where, in terms of the care rating, I do think it is treated with care. It is a sci-fi story patterned off a particular actual war, and so it is possible that there are things particular to the real Biafran Nigerian civil war that we don't have the context to realize.
Right.
So I would, with that caveat, as best as we are able to tell, approaching it purely as the fictional sci-fi book.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do think that there is enough sci-fi and just altered reality things that I don't, it's not a straight up representation.
No, it's not trying to literally retell that war.
No. And even just things like, the earth has been covered in nuclear waste and no one can breathe, and that affects how you move through the land. Like, there's enough of contextual, large, broad changes that it's not just the same thing again.
No, absolutely. I'm just saying that there might be things that make how much it's treated with care, like, trickier for someone to whom that actual historical event is personal history, for example, that would drastically change how that feels. And I just want to flag that as a possibility. But then returning to this fictional book, I do think it is treated with care.
Well, with enough, not just straight up with
enough.
care.
Sorry, enough care. Yeah. But also, if that's a thing, the book is super duper clear about that being the context for it. And
well,
so
yeah,
even
like that's,
in that,
that's why I think it's just enough, because you're not blindsided by this book. This book is never advocating for any of these things to be okay. It tells you that this is an altered sci-fi reference to this actual conflict. Like, that's why I'm saying that's enough. And I don't think that would change for different people, because it might be enough and then, it's not enough for you personally, but broadly speaking, this book is completely upfront about the author's viewpoint on the things it's telling.
Yeah. Then for the generational trauma, whether that's treated with care,
I actually think this is maybe not enough.
Yeah, it doesn't pull punches. Like, the dehumanization is context, the generational trauma is the plot, I think, is the way I might split those.
I think that a lot of the same type of care is taken for the generational trauma, but that the one difference here is that we get the character that it is being happening to in the moment saying, this was not okay happening to me. And we get the character who was doing the mistreatment, but also was treated that way in the past, saying, what was done to me is not okay. But we don't really get the character who is perpetuating the trauma at any point saying, what I did was not okay. Which we get direct refutations for the other types of trauma, including the dehumanization. We get other characters on screen saying, hey, in the moment right now, I'm being invited to participate and I don't want to because it's not all right. We don't get that for this other topic.
Right.
And part of that may just be that we have two main characters and one of them is treating the other a certain way. And we get from the one character saying, again, what's happening to me is not all right. But, I think for this to be enough, I think the character perpetuating would have to realize.
Yeah. Because even in the crisis moment, it doesn't seem like she begins to think of that in this.
Right. And for the dehumanization, like I said, we have characters invited to participate that push back. We don't get that with this.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm definitely good with not enough for the generational trauma. All right, how clear is the moral directionality?
Very clear.
Yeah, it's super clear. And all of it sucks.
Well, I want to note on that. So a lot of times when we have different parties that think that they are right, we end up with Tangled. The reason it's not Tangled, in my opinion, is because we kind of get the push from the narrative from our author saying, hey, none of this was okay. So It doesn't matter that our characters are opposing each other. It doesn't matter that they all think they're right, because we, the audience, get context that says, no, they're all incorrect. None of it's all right. The situation is not okay. You know, they're doing the best they can when they're retaliating, but they shouldn't have been there in the first place. And, you know, we get a lot of that.
And every time you find out another layer, it's just another iteration of
the bad.
So this group also interfered and did a thing that they probably shouldn't do.
Right.
It sucks. Just at every level, for sure.
Right.
All right. The point of view for the trauma and aftermath. We have two narrators. We have Onyi and Ify. So for the sections that are relating to Agu, like, we don't get his perspective directly. We just get him talking to one of them. But then for the two girls, we have each of their perspectives.
I actually want to point something out.
Sure.
For the dehumanization for Agu specifically. We get Onyi for the trauma and Ify for the aftermath. That's actually very specific.
Yeah.
So it's not mixed up there. He's talking to one person here and then a different person later.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Then for our trope spotter, I picked gray and gray morality. Where, as contrasted with black and white morality or blue-orange morality, this refers to both of the groups are doing murky stuff. No one's wholly right, no one's wholly wrong. Everybody's got a bunch of specific problems in how they're trying to go about things. No group is held up as, like, generally doing it better than the other.
Right. And this happens in different ways. This book does this. I just want to point this out. This book does a thing where instead of it being oppressor creates an oppressed group retaliates, they're both wrong. This book doesn't do that. This book says the oppressor is oppressing this other group. The other group is doing something else that is theoretically retaliation, but they're just hurting somebody else as like an excuse, basically.
Yeah.
So it's not, don't fight back if someone is hurting you. This book is very different. It's not saying that. I'm only mentioning that because for some people reading books that's saying, you know, pushing back when someone is harming you is traumatic. So I just want to
for sure
footnote the gray and gray morality.
All right. What was your favorite non-traumatic thing about this book? Was there a non-traumatic thing in this book? I think maybe. Okay. I do have. I think I have one. I do at least have a favorite. I think non-traumatic moment.
Thing. Okay.
Yeah. So, Ify prompting Agu to not leave his piano board behind was this, like, really nice moment, especially on the long arc of trying to undo the dehumanization that had happened to him previously. It's a nice counterpoint to some of the things that had happened earlier. Did you have a non-traumatic thing that you liked?
I really like the cybernetic limbs. Just and not even, this doesn't mean that it's trauma because we don't get a portrayal of a character who has one just to have one because they are born that way or It's always because of war, but I like that that's just kind of assumed. Like, granted, assumed so you can fight, but do you need something to function? Okay, we'll get it for you. You want an arm? You got lost one? Okay, we'll get one for you. You have trouble hearing? Okay, we'll either rebuild you an ear or we'll get you a cybernetic replacement or whatever it is you want. It doesn't really portray it as like, you have to be this way. It's like, okay, what do you want? what do you want to make your life better? End of story.
And then depending on what you pick, you might end up getting no longer classed as red blood, which could, that's the thing we ended up talking about.
That becomes then a dehumanization. But the thing that I like is you need an arm? Okay.
Here's an arm.
Here you go. Need a leg? All right. You want just to you need just having an issue with your eye? Okay, let's just get you that. Need your ear rebuilt? All right. It's just very, very blasé about, okay, here you go.
Yeah. Doesn't hold up the plot.
No,
for sure.
Not at all.
Yeah. All right. I think that's going to do it for War Girls by Tochi Onyebuchi.
Jesus, I'm looking at our list of content or trigger warnings.
For the book.
This is I think this might be the longest list we've had yet in a book.
It could be the longest one in a book that's made it onto the podcast. It's definitely not the longest one
that you've read and reviewed, but that we have talked about together. We have basically a paragraph of trigger warnings. Trigger warnings specifically, not even just content warning.
Yeah.
It's just a lot.
It is a lot. It's got a bunch. For sure. Yeah. I even because this was one that I had first read back in 2020 when I was still settling into how to do reviews and different things. And so on this reread, I added a bunch of stuff that I had missed the first time and updated the review. Because just I didn't have quite as many things on my radar as things to note. So that's also part of what you're noticing maybe is we're gradually getting to books where I was better at noticing that different things needed to be flagged, potentially. So that also could be it. I did actually in my written reviews switch to slightly just how I formatted them to make it be less of a block of text. So we've had some of those. But anyway, so that's it for War Girls. And thank you so much for joining us. We'll catch you on our next episode. Hello, everyone. Since this is either a highlight, a standalone book, or the first episode in a series, I'm jumping in to remind you what the rules are for this podcast. First rule is, no real people stories. That means that any details from our own lives are merely anecdotal. We do not read books about real people, and we are not reading historical fiction. The second rule is that we are basing our analyses off of how the author treats characters and what they put them through. We are not judging the accuracy of the trauma, the accuracy of any actual conditions that may be portrayed, nor the authenticity of a character's reaction to that trauma or that particular condition. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The hosts are not trained professionals, and their opinions come solely from personal experience. In this episode, we discuss fictional depictions of trauma and violence that may not be suitable for all audiences. Please take care of yourselves. Specific content warnings for each episode can be found in the show notes. Events in the media are discussed in approximate order of escalation. This episode contains spoilers.